I used to think bad news always came in envelopes. Something about the glue, how it tasted stale, how it forced you to run your tongue along the line of your own fate, made the message inside heavier, more dignified in its cruelty. A letter, a bill, a court notice, those had a shape, a weight, a ritual to their delivery. But it turns out, at 72, you can still learn something new about the velocity of disappointment. It arrived on a Friday, June 11th, at exactly 6:28 p.m. I know the time because I watched the clock above my oven tick, then watched my daughter-in-law Kayla's phone light up on the table. I'd finished rinsing the salad bowl. Romaine hearts, nothing fancy, but I'd done my best with the tomatoes, and sat down, joints complaining, to a chicken dinner I'd roasted with more discipline than inspiration. Kayla was helping herself to more wine, and Daniel, my only son, was mid-sentence about the merger at his office, which I suspect was HR's code for layoffs, because Daniel's stories these days all started strong and then shrank until you could barely find them on the plate. The phone buzzed with that subtle aggression newer models have. I don't own one. I still use the same flip phone I bought for emergencies after Margaret died. But even I know the sound. It's like a mosquito engineered by someone who hates both silence and the people forced to break it. Kayla's phone face up on the laminate, screen glaring blue. She didn't reach for it right away, too polite. She waited until Daniel trailed off, then flicked her eyes downward for half a second. A tick so fast, she probably thought it didn't register. I registered it. The preview line floated over the glass like a ghost. Wear him down. If he's tired enough, we'll get the house cheap. Consider subscribing so stories like this don't stay unseen. It's a funny thing seeing your life's value measured in a text message. The house cheap. 3 words that left my tongue dry and my knuckles white on the water glass. The name above the line was her dad, Kayla's father, the man who wore cologne like a lawsuit and never once failed to mention his portfolio before dessert. The text glowed, burned, then faded as quickly as it came, replaced by a smiling wallpaper of Kayla and Daniel in Maui, the last vacation before they tightened the budget. I watched her thumb curl protectively over the phone, as if shielding it from a draft. "More salad, Henry?" she asked, voice steady, not a hitch to betray her. She tipped the bowl in my direction, but her eyes stayed on the phone, calculating, waiting for any sign that the message had landed. "No thank you, Kayla." I moved my hand in a slow circle, as if stirring the air between us. "It's good, though." Crisp. Daniel was still talking. Maybe about refinancing. Maybe about the dog park. It doesn't matter. The words bounced off the kitchen tile and evaporated. My heart was a stone in a pond. The ripples went outward, but everything stayed below the surface. Kayla sipped her wine, a practiced motion. I caught a glimpse of her thumb scrolling under the table, arching to hide the screen from view. A second later, she looked up, smile sharp as glass, and asked Daniel if he'd checked the new interest rates on his 401k. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to demand what they meant by wear him down, but decades in the mill taught me the value of keeping pressure steady, of letting the machine do its work without sudden shocks. The dinner continued, every word and every forkful measured, precise. I counted the bites, the glances, the way Kayla's ring tapped the edge of her wineglass every time she set it down. After dessert, store-bought pie, Daniel's favorite, I excused myself to the bathroom. I didn't need to go. I just sat on the closed lid, staring at the tile grout, and listened to my own breath. I didn't cry, but I thought about it. I thought about the first time I signed the mortgage, the paint colors Margaret picked, the sound of Daniel's feet on these same floorboards when he was little and happy to call this place home. Back at the table, Kayla was already clearing plates, her face a careful blank. Daniel rubbed his eyes, weary, probably thinking about the mortgage. I watched them load the dishwasher in silence, a small team executing a silent plan. I wanted to smash a plate. I wanted to ask if they'd already picked out the listing agent, if they'd discussed what color to paint over the front door. I spent a month sanding, priming, and repainting last spring. But I didn't say anything. I watched the wine settle in the glass, the red curling at the edge. I waited for the last vibration of that message to fade from the table. Wear him down. If he's tired enough, we'll get the house cheap. The taste of betrayal lingered, sharp, metallic, and hard to swallow. I poured the rest of the wine into my glass, held it up to the light, and watched for another reflection. But all I saw was my own hand, trembling just slightly, steadying itself on the rim. For most of my life, I believed the only thing a man could leave behind was what he'd managed to scrape together with his own hands. Mine weren't made for poetry or promises, just for torque and torque alone. Tightening bolts in the mill, feathering a paintbrush on the eaves, stacking plywood, and shoveling gravel. I spent 44 years waking up before the sun to make sure I never had to borrow gas money from anyone. A strange pride, maybe, but that's how you survive in a town like this, where the only thing more reliable than the frost is the gossip. I didn't really learn to keep books until Margaret's cancer got bad. Even then, it was just jotting what we owed in a spiral notebook, cross-hatching old balances, watching the numbers never quite land in the black. Every time I thought about retiring, some new expense slipped in. Daniel's braces, the car repairs, the band trip to Cedar Point that cost more than my first transmission job. I worked nights when the mill coughed overtime, took cash gigs on weekends, roofing after tornadoes, landscaping for families who paid in cold drinks and well wishes. If Daniel needed it, he got it. If Margaret asked, I did it. That's the arithmetic of love. Everything you have divided by everyone you care about, minus whatever you need for yourself. I didn't know the cost until Kayla and her phone, until the number in her father's message calcified every tiny loss into something bigger than principle. I remembered the time Daniel needed a loan to cover a month's rent after his teaching job got cut down to part-time. I wrote the check and didn't tell him it meant canceling a fishing trip I'd saved up for since the previous summer. I didn't mention how I'd co-signed the auto loan, or how I quietly paid the first 3 insurance bills while Daniel waited for his new HR package to kick in. When Kayla and Daniel moved across state lines, I drove the U-Haul, covered the cleaning fee, patched the holes in the drywall myself before returning the deposit key. The ink from all those transactions is still under my nails. Even now, I can feel it when I squeeze a lemon or peel the label off a beer. I scraped paint from the east wall every spring, even when the tendon in my right elbow sang with the pain that only comes from 40 years of manual labor. I patched the fence after their golden retriever clawed the pickets to hell chasing squirrels. I left $20 bills in Daniel's birthday cards, signing the bottom with a shaky joke about beer money or treating yourself, as if the thing that mattered was the joke and not the quiet surrender behind it. Some nights, when the power flickered and the house made those settling noises that keep old men up late, I'd tell myself these were just the costs of being a father. You pay the bill, you don't keep score. But the truth is, there's a scoreboard whether you acknowledge it or not. I ignored it out of love, or maybe out of fear that if I ever did tally the sum, I'd see how little of myself was left. Now, sitting in the dead hush of my kitchen, I realized the scoreboard was in someone else's hands. A stranger's, no less. Kayla's father, a man who'd never lifted a box for them, whose only investment was cold numbers and a cheap buyout. The rest of the world keeps score, and I was the only idiot who thought the game didn't apply to me. I looked around the house, counting invisible hash marks. The patched tile by the pantry, the sweat-stained trim around the bathroom door, the spot where I'd painted over Daniel's childhood graffiti and never bothered to touch up the color match. Every sacrifice, every micro-miracle condensed into this one message: wear him down. For a moment, I wanted to call Margaret, or rather to conjure her up and ask what she would do. She would have clapped her hands, made a list, and marshaled the neighborhood to shame Kayla and her father into submission. Margaret believed in consequences. I admired that about her. It was the only thing that ever truly scared me. Instead, I sat very still and tried to measure the difference between selflessness and stupidity. I'd spent a lifetime making sure Daniel never saw me weak, never watched me count my own sacrifices out loud. But here I was, with nothing but a silent room and a redacted future. Maybe fathers shouldn't keep score, but sons should know that there's a limit, a bottom to the well, even if you never let them see it. I poured the rest of the coffee, cold and bitter as regret, and stared at the condensation on the rim. Wear him down, the message said. If that was the play, I'd show them just how stubborn I could be. I might be 72 and running on borrowed cartilage, but I'd outlast 1,000 her dads before I let them bury me in my own living room. I set my jaw and let the silence do its work. This wasn't just about a house. It was about refusing to go quietly, about making sure that, when the final score was posted, the world would know which side played fair and which side only pretended to. After Kayla and Daniel left, I walked the perimeter of my living room like a man tracing the edges of a field before the first frost. The sun had just gone down, but the afterglow made the room look unfamiliar. Long shadows on the walls, the old floral couch faded to the color of bruise. I imagined each piece of furniture as an entry in a ledger, notched with tiny wounds invisible to everyone but me. The grandfather clock Margaret's mother gave us as a wedding gift ticked loud enough to make my chest vibrate. Every chime, a reminder that time wasn't something you could save in a bank or loan to your children. Time was the bill you paid, over and over, until the collections department came for you. I busied myself clearing the table, the way I used to after family holidays, when the house was thick with gravy and laughter. I rinsed each plate with care, making sure to leave no trace of the meal, as if I could wash away the memory of Kayla's message along with the chicken grease. The sink, for once, didn't back up. I let the hot water run longer than I should have, watching steam rise and disappear into nothing. For a few minutes, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the empty house. You can't hear heartbreak, but you can sense its echo. The way even the refrigerator hum sounds hesitant, off-key. I set my hands on the counter and let the cool laminate press into my palms. The urge to break something, to let the plates smash against the tile and scatter into an honest mess, was so strong I had to grip the sink to steady myself. But I didn't do it. Instead, I grabbed a yellow legal pad from the drawer by the fridge, tore off the first 3 sheets. Margaret always insisted the first few pages were for testing pens, as if the ink could sense its destiny, and sat down at the kitchen table with a blue roller ball that Daniel left behind years ago. I wrote, June 11th, Friday, 6:28 p.m. Dinner with Daniel and Kayla. Kayla's phone received text from her dad. Preview read, "Wear him down. If he's tired enough, we'll get the house cheap." Kayla moved phone away, tried to hide, offered salad, did not mention message. I drew a rough map of the table, me facing the window, Kayla to my left, Daniel to my right. I shaded in where the phone sat, even added an arrow to indicate the path of her eyes. I wrote down the time from the stove clock. Digital, green, always 2 minutes fast. I underlined house cheap 3 times, not because I thought I'd forget, but because the repetition made it real. I tried to remember the exact sound of Kayla's voice when she offered more salad, whether there was a wobble, a slip, a tremor to betray the lie. I wrote, voice steady, no guilt, like she'd done this before. Every detail went down, no matter how trivial. I even noted that Daniel did not appear to notice, that he was talking about merger and 401k and didn't once look up during the exchange. I wrote his silence into the record, too. There's a saying in the mill, if a thing wants speed, give it paper instead. The guys who ran maintenance used to joke that the fastest way to stop a runaway process was to introduce a form, a checklist, a memo. Paper slows things down, gives you a chance to breathe and think before you react. It was the first lesson they taught us, back when the machines were new and the overtime was plentiful. So I filled the page, then another. I wrote until my hand cramped and the lines sloped downhill, like the words themselves were growing tired. I wanted to capture everything while it was still sharp, before the memory could get watered down by sleep or denial. When I finished, I put the pen down and stared at the sheets. The blue ink looked raw against the yellow. It reminded me of bruises on old skin, the kind that blooms slow and deep after years of being careful. I tore off the notes, stacked them neatly, and tucked them into a manila envelope labeled Taxes Old, because it was the only one not already bursting with receipts and warranties. I sat back in the chair, the cheap vinyl sticking to my arms, and tried to let myself breathe. The notes didn't erase anything, but they made it possible to keep moving. If Kayla and her father wanted to wear me down, they'd have to get through every word, every page, every record I could make. That envelope became my lifeline. Not a shield exactly, just proof that I still had a say in my own story, that I could leave a record behind, even if no one wanted to read it. I poured a finger of bourbon, neat, and sipped it slow. The bitterness clung to my throat, but it was honest. That's more than I could say about most things these days. Subscribe and share one line you wish you'd heard earlier. Someone will borrow it. The Saturday after the text message, I woke up at 5:40 a.m., heartbeat hammering, as if I'd slept through a fire alarm. The house was darker than usual. The porch light flickered, out of sync with the steady pulse in my chest. I made coffee, black and stronger than usual, and drank it in silence while I tried to steady my hands. By 8, I'd showered, pressed my best shirt, and rehearsed what I would say. I even wrote it on a card. Just the facts. Keep it short. Don't show them you're scared. I arrived at Rosa Calder's office at 9:05, 3 minutes late by my watch, but still early enough to beat the cleaning crew. The place was in a strip mall that looked new on the outside but hollowed out from within. Half the storefronts vacant, the parking lot lines faded to ghostly hints. The Calder Law, Elder in Real Estate sign buzzed weakly, like it hadn't been serviced since the Bush administration. The waiting area smelled like last year's printer ink and the sour tang of canned air freshener. I sat in a faux leather chair, rigid as a church pew, with my envelope of notes in one hand and a thumb pressing down hard on the edge, hoping the pain would keep me awake. I watched the second hand on the wall clock stutter and skip, time wanting to move faster, but unable to. At exactly 9:13, Rosa herself appeared in the doorway. She was smaller than I expected, her charcoal suit too big in the shoulders, her hair pulled so tight it made my own scalp itch. She shook my hand, a grip so brief and dry it felt like flipping a page. "Mr. Lowell?" she asked, but she already knew. Her eyes were precise, reading everything, missing nothing. "Yes, thank you for seeing me on short notice. Urgency is rarely wasted in my line of work," she said, and gestured me to follow. I wondered if she used that line on all her clients, or if she could sense the desperate energy in my walk. Her office was neat, almost to the point of violence. Not a single loose paper on her desk. The only color came from a single glass paperweight, green like a bottle left out in the sun too long. She sat, steepled her fingers, and looked at me as if waiting for the first card in a hand of poker. I took the notes from the envelope, careful not to let them tremble. I wrote down what happened last night. There's a message from Kayla's father to her. I saw it. I wrote it down. I slid the papers across the desk. Is that the kind of thing people bring you? She nodded but didn't smile. It's exactly the thing. She read the first page, her lips moving silently on the phrase, "wear him down." The silence stretched. I counted to 17 before she set the notes on the glass desktop and tapped the pen once, hard, on the margin. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Lowell. This isn't rare. It's not even unusual anymore. If you want to keep your house and your dignity, you'll need to build a fence, not outside, on paper. She paused, held my gaze. Do you understand? I nodded, throat dry. She slid a form across the desk. This is a no harassment notice. You sign, I file with the county. It gives you leverage if anyone tries to pressure you into a quick sale. She didn't say Kayla's name, or Daniel's, or even mention family. She just kept it procedural, as if the law itself could erase the sharpness of the wound. And this, she said, flipping to another form, is a cease and desist. You're naming Kayla's father. He's off the table for direct negotiation. If he contacts you or your son or your daughter-in-law, we build a record. Every call, every letter, every visit. We stack it up. It doesn't have to be nice, but it does have to be official. She spoke in short, clipped sentences, the kind that didn't leave room for sentimentality. I appreciated it. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford this morning. She looked at me for a long time before continuing. Are you willing to go this far? I thought of Margaret, of her uncompromising sense of what was right. I thought of Daniel, 6 years old, refusing to apologize after breaking a neighbor's window because it was already cracked. I thought of the text and the ache in my wrist as I wrote out every word. Yes, I said. I am. She moved on to the next stack of paper. This is a do not solicit letter. You're appointing an agent. Any offer to buy the property comes through them. No more home visits, no more side deals, no more pressure from anyone, not even family. You get every offer in writing, and you have the right to ignore them if you choose. I signed where she pointed, my hand making small, ugly shapes across the page. The ink smeared once, but I didn't stop to fix it. The last document, she said, is an affidavit of intent. It says you won't sign away the house without an independent appraisal and a mandatory cool-off period. If anyone tries to rush you, you can take this to court. I looked at the page, the legal language curling around itself like brambles. Isn't that a little extreme? I asked. Her expression didn't budge. You came to me for armor, Mr. Lowell. This is what it looks like now. No one is coming to save you. I signed. When I finished, she gathered the papers, pressed them into a file folder, and walked me to the county clerk's office 2 doors down. The clerk, a woman in her 40s with a voice like sandpaper and a handshake to match, stamped each copy with a wet, authoritative thud. The sound echoed up my arm, stronger and more final than I expected. Rosa held the last stamped page in the air, letting the ink dry. You're protected, she said, softer now, almost kind. But understand, there's no going back. Family's a beautiful thing until it isn't. The only thing that matters from here is the record. She put her hand on my shoulder, just for a second, and looked me dead in the eye. You did the right thing. If they want to fight, we'll bury them in paper. It's how the world works now. I nodded. For the first time all week, I didn't feel like I might fall apart in public. I left the building with the file clutched to my chest, the blue ink from the stamp still wet, staining the edge of my thumb. My house was still there, waiting for me, but it didn't feel quite like home anymore. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was mine. And for now, that was enough. After the county clerk's stamp dried and I'd driven home in the slow crawl of late morning traffic, the house felt changed, as if every wall had inched a fraction further away from me while I was gone. I let myself in through the garage, the way I always did, but even my own key felt foreign in the lock, like a test I'd barely passed. The file folder from Rosa, my armor, as she called it, sat heavy under my arm as I checked every window and deadbolt. Margaret used to laugh at how often I checked locks, but now it was all that separated the world outside from the last thing I truly owned. I set the folder on the dining room table and stood for a long while, running my hand over the battered wood where Daniel once carved his initials with a steak knife. I looked at the phone, the old flip-top, its gray plastic yellowing at the hinge. For the first time in months, I didn't dread making a call. Instead, I found the number for Northfield Realty, punched it in, and waited as it rang with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm. "Northfield, this is Deshawn speaking," a voice answered, deep and calm, like the guy already knew nothing would surprise him today. "Hello, my name is Henry Lowell. I need to set up a seller representation, single agent only. No dual agency, no family or friend connections, just the basics." A pause, then a faint sound like papers shuffling. "Are you available this afternoon, Mr. Lowell?" "Yeah," I said. "I'll be here." He gave me a time, 3:30 sharp, and then repeated my name, spelling it back to me as if each letter mattered. When the call ended, I sat back and let myself feel a fraction lighter, like a man who's just learned the proper way to hold a shield. At 3:30 on the dot, the doorbell rang, and I let Deshawn in. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves buttoned even in the early summer heat, and carried a slim leather portfolio under his arm. He looked around my living room, not with the flattery of a salesman, but like a doctor taking vital signs. He noticed the creak in the floorboards, the small patch where the paint was fresher, and the faint scent of lemon polish still clinging to the baseboards. He made no effort to hide it. "Let's be clear about the scope, Mr. Lowell," he said, laying a single form on the coffee table. "This is exclusive seller representation. I work for you. No buyers through me, no friend of a friend deals, no dual agency. If anyone wants this house, they go through me and me alone. I liked that. I liked it a lot." He explained every paragraph, every clause, never once hurrying me along. When I hesitated at the "for sale by owner" exclusion, he pointed to the line and said, "If you want out, you're free to walk away. But as long as I represent you, nobody else gets in the door." I signed. His pen was a heavy, expensive thing, but it wrote with a simple, even line. No smudges. "Next step is an appraisal," he said. "I don't trust comps. I want a third-party independent value. You'll get the report first. You decide if it's fair. If you don't like it, we challenge it." He typed something into his phone, one of those sleek black rectangles I'd grown to despise, and then set it back in his pocket, already forgotten. From now on, any communication about this property comes to me, in writing, email only. You'll be copied on everything, Mr. Lowell. No surprise visits, no unannounced walkthroughs, no pressure. If someone calls you, you tell them to email me, and you forward the message. Simple. I nodded, absorbing the rules like a man memorizing the dimensions of his own cell. He picked up the signed agreement, slid it into his portfolio, and looked at me for a long second. Not the way people usually look at the elderly. There was no pity, no patience, just a businesslike respect. It was the best anyone had made me feel in weeks. When he left, I printed every email address and instruction on a sheet of paper, taped it to the inside of the cabinet over the coffee maker, and poured myself a cup. The first thing I did, while it was still steaming, was scan and email Deshawn the notes from my yellow pad and the letters from Rosa. I didn't bother with a greeting, just attached the files, typed as discussed, and hit send. His reply came 5 minutes later. Paper first. Always. The phrase made me smile, something rare these days. I poured another cup and read the message again, letting its clarity settle in my bones. Maybe I didn't have much left, but I had a team now. A lawyer, a realtor, a paper trail. For the first time since Kayla's text, I believed I might just hold the line. On Tuesday morning, the mailbox at the end of my driveway spit out a fat white envelope with "Good Neighbor Offer" printed across the return address in a font too cheerful for its own good. The sun was barely up, but I was already dressed, the coffee gone cold on the counter as I eyed the mail slot for any sign of sabotage. When I slid the envelope open, a single sheet tumbled out. A lowball offer for the house, typed in 12-point Arial and signed "Yours in Friendship," with a parenthetical smiley face and an email address that looked like someone had mashed random keys until it sounded suburban. The amount, $219,000, nearly $100,000 below the last county assessment, was circled in blue ink. At the bottom, in a nervous scrawl, was a postscript. I hear you don't need all that space these days. Let's make this easy for everyone. I ran a finger along the edge of the paper, feeling a pulse of anger so sharp I had to close my eyes and count to 10 before it dulled. The phrase, "don't need all that space," bounced around my skull like a trapped moth. It wasn't even the money, not really. It was the casual cruelty, the assumption that I'd already been erased from the equation. I set the letter on the kitchen table, right next to my legal folder, and started my own counterattack. First, I scanned the offer into my old desktop, making sure the date stamp and the return address were visible. Then I took a red pen, never blue because Margaret said red made things stand out, and circled the offending number 3 times, underlining the "easy" for everyone, as if I were grading an essay in a class on indecency. I composed a new email, attached the scan, and addressed it to both Rosa and Deshawn, as per the protocols. The subject line was simple: First Blood. My hands shook only a little as I typed. Rosa replied in under an hour. Her message was short, but it felt like a slapshot to the teeth. Received. This violates the "do not solicit." I am issuing a formal refusal and referencing your previous filings. You are covered. Deshawn's reply came minutes after. We log this under pressure attempts. Paper trail gets thicker. If this escalates, we use it. No further action needed on your end. I read those 2 emails a dozen times. The words like bricks in a wall I hadn't known how to build until now. It wasn't just about denying the offer. It was about refusing to play their game. Every piece of paper, every digital copy, was another layer between me and the people who thought they could outlast me. I didn't even need to respond to the neighbor. The lawyers and the agents did it for me, and their words were sharper than anything I'd ever managed on my own. The rest of the day went by in a haze of small chores: trimming the hedges, oiling the hinges on the old shed, updating my password list in case anyone tried to get clever with my utilities. Every task felt like digging a moat, lining the property with evidence that I was still here, still paying attention. I didn't tell Daniel or Kayla about the offer. Let them wonder why their friend or whoever hadn't gotten a reply. Let them chew on the silence for a while. I'd learned at last that some fights aren't worth bringing to the dinner table. That night, I sat at the kitchen counter with the mail spread out in front of me. I traced the red circle on the neighbor's offer with my thumb and listened to the house settle, the way old bones do when you finally let them rest. Every insult, every underhanded play would end up in the file. If they wanted a war of attrition, I'd become a fortress. I thought about what Rosa said. The only thing that matters from here is the record. I didn't know if it would save me, but it felt like a new kind of armor, one they could never steal or cheapen. I filed the letter away and poured myself a small scotch, savoring the way the fire lingered. I raised the glass to the darkness, then turned off every light in the house, daring the night to try me. That evening, after the neighbor's offer had been filed away and the sun bruised the horizon with the last of its patience, I set my phone on the kitchen counter and scrolled through the settings until I found voice memo. It wasn't paranoia, not really. It was just insurance, like the seatbelt I wore even when driving 2 blocks to the grocery, or the spare batteries in every drawer. When a world decides to turn you into a case file, you learn to collect your own evidence. I sent Daniel a text. "Can you and Kayla come by for coffee after dinner?" "Nothing urgent. Just want to clear the air." He replied with a thumbs up emoji, and I sat at the table, arranging the papers into neat stacks: the do not solicit, the no harassment, the exclusive agency agreement, and the scan of the neighbor's lowball bid. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, set out 3 mugs, and wiped down the table with a clean rag. For a second, the house almost felt normal again. They arrived a little after 8. Kayla's face was lit by her phone screen as they walked up the path, her thumbs working overtime. Daniel looked tired, his collar slightly rumpled, like he'd slept in his shirt. When I opened the door, he tried a smile, but it sagged at the corners. "Smells like the old days," Kayla said, breezing past me into the kitchen. "Are you baking something?" Her voice had the bright, brittle quality of someone pretending nothing had changed. "Just coffee," I said. "Please sit." Daniel slumped into the chair closest to the window. He glanced at the paperwork but didn't touch it. Kayla eyed the stacks, then made a point of pushing her phone screen down on the table, as if to signal she was all ears. I poured coffee and let the silence do its work for a moment. Then I clicked the record button on the phone, not bothering to hide it. "I want to be clear about a few things," I began. "I've retained legal counsel, and I've hired an agent for the house. Any discussion about the property, the value, or its future goes through them. That's not up for debate." Kayla cocked her head, a tiny smirk at the edge of her mouth. "You called us here for that? You could have just texted." I slid the do not solicit letter across the table, followed by the no harassment notice. The paper made a clean sound against the wood, crisp and final. "These are real," I said. "If either of you or anyone on your behalf tries to talk me into selling or lowballs me again, it goes straight to the file. There won't be any more back and forth." Daniel finally looked up, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Dad, we just—" But Kayla cut him off, not with words, but with a touch on his wrist, so light I almost didn't see it. She laughed, not unkindly, but with an edge that made my ears ring. "You're overreacting. It's not that serious. We just thought you'd be happier somewhere smaller, you know? Less upkeep, more money for trips, or—" She trailed off, realizing too late there was nowhere for that sentence to go. I reached for the next stack, the agency agreement, then the appraisal order from Deshawn. "This is how it's going to be," I said, voice steady as I could manage. "You want to talk about the house?" "Email Deshawn. Otherwise, this topic is closed. If you're here for dinner, you're welcome. But if you're here for anything else, you can leave right now." Daniel stared at the fridge, at the magnets I'd collected over decades of roadside stops and hardware store openings. His voice was almost a whisper. "We didn't mean—" I cut him off, not sharp, just firm. "It's done. I've kept the lights on here since you were born. I can manage a few more years." I poured more coffee, filling my own mug and leaving theirs untouched. "If you want to stay, we can talk about literally anything else. If not, I understand." The silence that followed was cold and brittle, like the surface of a frozen pond. Kayla reached for her phone, tapped the screen, then stood. "Come on, Daniel. We're done here." She didn't wait for him to follow. He hesitated, eyes searching my face for something. Regret, forgiveness, a sign that the bridge wasn't truly burned. I tried to give him a small smile, but it was more grimace than reassurance. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, voice small. "I just wanted—" But he didn't finish. He let the sentence dangle, untethered, and followed Kayla out. I sat alone in the kitchen, the record light on my phone still blinking, casting a red dot on the surface of the table. I let the memo run for a few more minutes, documenting the silence the way the house inhaled and exhaled around the echo of what had just happened. Then I turned it off, saved the file, and filed the new paperwork into the ever-thickening folder. No yelling, no accusations, no second chances. Just paper, the silent power of truth, stacking up one sheet at a time. I washed their mugs, wiped the table, and sat for a long time in the glow of the under-cabinet lights, wondering if the house was really mine anymore, or if it had become just another full in the case against the people I loved. On Thursday morning, the appraisal report arrived in my inbox. The subject line was Northfield Market Analysis, 157 Hillcrest, and I sat for a full 5 minutes just staring at it, weighing whether to open the file or let it rot unread. I finally double-clicked, and there it was in bold black and white. $313,000, a full $94,000 above the neighbor's best shot. The document was thick with charts and photos, square footage comparisons, snapshots of my old maple tree, even a section about custom trim features and historic millworker provenance. The words meant nothing, really, but the number at the top sang a pure, clear note in my chest. I was worth more than they said. I printed out the report, 3 copies, and added them to the legal folder. Next, I checked email, something I'd learned to do hourly, now that every interaction had the power to change the terms of my existence. In the sea of coupons and bank notices sat a message from County Mediation Resource. It was blunt and bureaucratic, but I read it twice to make sure. Unsolicited home sale pressure is logged and on record. Civil harassment petition available should contact persist. Please reply if further escalation occurs. I replied with a thank you, then shut the laptop and let the room settle around me. There was no victory parade, no ticker tape, just the familiar hum of the fridge and a thin stream of sun cutting across the table. I exhaled and realized I hadn't truly breathed all week. I spent the next hour cleaning out the fire safe in the master closet, a battered black box with a sticky dial, and the faded sticker Margaret put on after she watched a daytime segment about home disaster preparedness. The old safe held birth certificates, their wedding license, photos of Daniel's first birthday, and a handful of cash I'd always meant to convert into something more practical. I placed the house deed on top, followed by the appraisal report, the letters from Rosa, and the scan of the neighbor's offer. I added the copy of the audio memo from Tuesday's kitchen standoff, labeling the USB drive with the date and the word evidence in red Sharpie. I locked the safe and spun the dial twice just to hear the click. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, hands on my knees, and tried to imagine what Margaret would have thought of all this. She would have been proud of the system, maybe, but angry that it was needed in the first place. By late afternoon, the house felt too quiet. I made myself a ham sandwich, then sat at the table and tried to eat without tasting it. The loneliness pressed in, slow and certain, but I pushed it aside and found an old notepad. I started writing a letter to Daniel, not for confrontation, but because it was the only way I could think to explain all the moving pieces and the cost. June 17th. Daniel, by now you know about the appraisal. You'll see it's almost $100,000 above the neighbor offer. That number isn't just for the square footage. It's the sweat, the hours, the history, and yes, the cost of every decision that we ever made as a family. I want you to understand why I did all this. It's not just the house. It's that I spent my whole life making sure you had more than I did. And the thought of someone taking it from me, us, like I was already dead, was more than I could take. Everything is logged with the county. There is a lawyer, an agent, and a paper trail you can't argue with. If anyone pressures you, tell them it's not your problem. But here's the important part. I forgive you. I know Kayla's family means well in their way. I just wish you'd told me what was happening before it got this far. Sundays at 2 are still open for dinner if you want. No talk of the house until we're ready. If you need help or a place to stay, this is still your home. Even if it's just for one night. Love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, then slid it into an envelope and wrote Daniel's name on the front. I wasn't sure if I'd mail it or leave it under his windshield or just keep it in the safe with everything else. But it felt right, and that was enough. As evening fell, I opened the front door and let the cool air wash through the house, carrying away the day's static. I looked out at the street, at the houses lined up like silent witnesses, and felt, for the first time in weeks, a sense of quiet justice. Not retribution, not payback, but the simple satisfaction of holding my own. I closed the door, checked the locks, and turned in for the night. The world was still out there, circling. But so was I. Justice, I've learned, isn't a moment. It's a string of small decisions, of saying no and meaning it over and over until the noise fades and the only voice left in the house is your own. Some men think justice is a slammed door or a line drawn in the dirt. For me, it was a single line in an email, all offers through agent. It was the blue stamp on a county form, the sound of the clerk's hand as it pressed down, soft but unbreakable. I kept the folder on the dining table, never more than an arm's reach away. Each time I walked past, I tapped the top, just to feel the thickness of it. Paper isn't heavy, but it builds a kind of gravity. I added to the file every week. Water bills, photos of the roof repair, even grocery receipts. It was a habit, maybe, or a superstition. Or maybe I just wanted the record to show I hadn't vanished. Not yet. Some things didn't change. I still misplaced my glasses, sometimes finding them in the freezer or on top of the toilet tank. I still made pasta for dinner twice a week, always oversalting it the way Margaret used to hate. The house still creaked at night, but I found the sound comforting, proof that some structures hold, even after you've patched them a dozen times. I saw Daniel once more, in the parking lot outside the hardware store. He was alone. He parked 2 spaces away from me, then just stood there, staring at the cracked asphalt. He didn't wave. I didn't either. We both knew that time would have to do the work for us. After that, things settled into their new rhythm. No more surprise visits, no more pressure. Kayla sent a single text, weeks later. "Hope you're okay." I replied with, "I am." Nothing more. We'd learned to communicate on the narrowest possible bandwidth, and maybe that was for the best. Sometimes in the evenings I sat at the kitchen table and read the letters from Rosa, the measured language of legal defense. Every phrase a small bulwark against being erased. I liked the sound of her words. Fence, protection, record, intent. They were words you could build something on, if only a quiet life. I kept the front yard tidy, mowed every Saturday, swept the walk. I nodded to the neighbors, some of whom knew what was happening, and some who would never guess. If I was that old guy with the folder, so be it. Better than being the cautionary tale in someone else's anecdote. I never did sell the house. At least, not yet. Maybe one day I would. But if that day came, it would be on my terms, with my name on every page. This is how justice works, in the small world of a single kitchen, in the unremarkable arc of a man's old age. It's not a revolution. It's just a refusal to let someone else write the ending. I finished my coffee, signed the last page of the file, and set it down in the center of the table, like a flag planted in the smallest country on earth. My hands were steady. I waited for the house to settle, then stood and turned off the light, leaving the folder exactly where it belonged. If any of this rings true, subscribe and leave one sentence, the boundary you'll set this week.